So I'm here with Colin Pink, front of house engineer with the Hans Zimmer live tour. Is that the best way of describing who you are and where we are?
Yeah, absolutely. We're here in Melbourne, in the Rod Laver Arena, which is a great space.
It's the Rod Laver Arena.
It's the Rod Laver Arena.
Famous tennis player.
Indeed.
He'll never forgive you if you.
Well, you know.
So thanks for just having a chat, Colin. I guess sort of big picture stuff first.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of thing is pretty unique. This setup, this arrangement, this collection of musicians. I guess
Sure.
because it's a unique guy. Hans Zimmer's pretty unique composer. So would you say this kind of show would have just been impossible even 5 years ago? Like is technology caught up to the point where you can actually stage a show like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, certainly 10 years ago, you'd be in big trouble. We're running 260 inputs, a lot more outputs than you would expect, you know, and just having 50 odd people on stage just makes it logistically very, very difficult. You know, from both a front of house point of view, but also a monitoring point of view. Maurizio's got 48 in-ear mixes to deal with. And, you know, that in itself just creates, you know, a massive workload.
Who's got the tougher job, you or Maurizio?
Ooh. It's funny because if you ask him, he'll say me, and if you ask me, I'll say him. The reality is, obviously, they're both tricky in different ways. I think, from my point of view, the great thing, the fun thing, but also the tricky thing with Hans's music is it's so eclectic. You've got so many different styles, and trying to kind of dynamically make that work as a whole is the challenge, but also the fun, because you know you've got some very quiet bits of the show, you've got some very powerful bits. I try not to say loud. I kind of try to think in terms of big and small instead of loud and quiet.
Sure.
And it's all about controlling that dynamic. I suppose while talking about dynamics, it's also not just the overall musical content, but you've got, you know, 2 drummers, 2 percussionists, so you've got a very dynamic kind of band section, but you've also got string and brass sections with a very different dynamic, and then, you know, effects and some supplemental playback, which has all sort of been pre-mixed for film. So very, very different dynamic ranges which we need to sort of put together. And this is the stage for Hans Zimmer Live. There's a lot going on. One of the most interesting stations is Pedro's multi-woodwind, but also electronic wind controllers, which is controlling these synths, as well as, you know, small flutes to massive bass flutes. He uses a headset mic for a lot of the flutes, an SEV7. We've also got SE8s for him for the duduk. And yes, it's a massive of instruments, but we try and basically, because everything is so complex, I try and make it as simple as possible. So that you're kind of reducing the things that can go wrong. So a lot of it's on the headset and the electronics. Then moving over, we have 2 drum kits, Holly and Asia, with a percussion spine between them. And being 2 drum kits, it was quite interesting when we were trying to mic up the overheads. So we ended up with 3, so basically a left, centre, right between the 2 kits. We started off with 2 pairs, but it was all a bit phasey.
Sure.
And sometimes one's on the kit and the other's on percussion. Sometimes they're both on percussion. A lot of the time they're both on the kits. So that's a good challenge. on top of them, we've got two other percussionists, Stephen on one side of the stage and Alexandra on the other. She's got a great setup. That's more orchestral-based percussion. And one of the problems we have with percussionists in the downstage corners is timelining the PA. Tom
Sort of touched on that, didn't he, with the matrix thing?
Touched on. So essentially, it just annoyed me. You know, some people time a PA to the snare drum, and we've got 5. So I ended up splitting the stage into 17. I was thinking of using the Timax system. Of course, you know, there's a few systems out there. I kind of think Timax is the best. But the T software in the Digicos also has a crosspoint delay matrix. So what I did was, as I say, split the stage into 17 areas. Each of those is a mono group that feeds into the matrix, and then we can time align each group to each individual front fill, of which there are 10.
Gotcha.
And the side hangs as well, because the problem on the sides, if you just do a mono, it just gets really flat and boring. And obviously the difference in distance between stage left and stage right on the side is, you know, 60 milliseconds, which is massive.
Significant, yeah.
And then, as well as those mono groups going to the fills, I've got normal stereo groups going to the PA, which I then just time align in an upstage, downstage point of view for the main PA. And the two, I was slightly worried that the timing from a phase point of view wouldn't work together, but it blends in really nicely because you've got the natural sound off the stage that comes in line with the front fills, and as you walk back into the coverage of the main hang, what happens is at the front it just feels like it's an early reflection, and then as you go back it becomes the main kind of focus. So it works really well, and I think time aligning front fills, even at front of house, back 50 meters, it does help with the clarity and positional information. So yeah, it's a good trick.
Yeah. So you would encourage I guess front of house guys, you know, to maybe think about front fill a little more than just
completely.
being
Completely.
a way of covering.
And it's historically it's tricky because all the manuals tell you to time align your front fills to your PA.
Yep.
Because that makes it phase coherent, and that's absolutely fine if you've got an electronic band. But you know, if you've got a snare drum downstage right, in the front row the loudest thing isn't the PA, it's that snare drum.
Yep.
So you should time to that. I'm slightly biased because my background's theatre, so I kind of spent a lot of my career, you know, time aligning reinforcement systems as opposed to big PAs to singers on stage as they walk around, and you know that does scale up to arena.
Sure.
And yeah, I would suggest everyone try it because it's a really good trick. Anyway, apart from then, we've got keyboards. We've got
Hand zone. Of course, he's got a German synth.
Well, he's got a few. So we've got a few things. Hans himself plays keys, guitar, banjo. We've got 2 guitarists. We've got 2 bass players. We've got 3 violinists, 2 electric cellists, a choir of 12, an orchestra, which is basically strings and brass because everything else is covered on the keys or within the percussion. Strings are all clip-on Neumanns, and brass is primarily SET1s, which have got the titanium diaphragms, which gives you a really nice top end if you want stuff to punch through. So I've got them on the French horns. And then the 4200s, which is the standard capsules on the brass, because the trumpet doesn't need any help in that department. Drum kit again, SE on the toms, 57 on a snare. Neumann 103s for the overheads, just to give it some size and warmth.
So you're a fan of the SE mics, obviously.
I am a fan of SE. It's funny, they've come a long way, and I think, what do I think? I don't know why I like them, I just do. I think they work really well on drums and vocals. And yeah, they're my new sort of favourite go-to. They're really good value for money, not that that matters on this scale.
Sure.
But the V beats and the V kicks, I think, are just a great all-rounder. What I think they do very well is they give you options that allow you to get a sound that's kind of specific to your needs. Not good for everything. On the percussion, I've got DPA 4099s mainly. But yeah, and I still love a 57 on a snare drum. So,
yep. Some things don't change.
Some things don't change, absolutely.
That's really great. Yeah, cool.
What
It's
else can I
such
tell
an
you?
Aladdin's cave, isn't it? So
Yeah.
crazy. Is now, like, while we're here, do you want to just explain to me, I guess, how you build your mix? So it's not insurmountable. It's not like trying to literally mix 200 plus sources. You kind of build it in blocks or foundational kind of schema as such. Or am I?
I guess it's an interesting question because when I'm sound checking, I don't like to sound check. I like the band to rehearse and me to play catch up and just shove mics on and see what happens. I don't necessarily recommend that when you're starting out because it's hard to know what you're listening to, but that's kind of why I do it, because I think if you go round a drum kit, make it sound perfect, if you then put on 24 string mics 2 meters from the drum kit, everything goes out the window.
Sure.
So you may as well have those string mics on from the beginning. And how I look at things, I try and group things within dynamic ranges. So a lot of people will put like a mastering chain on their master bus. I never do that. Unless I've got a 4-piece band. But for instance, on this show, I've got a drum bus, a playback bus, a band bus, a orchestral bus, and then a singing bus, and a couple of other bits. But the reason I split it mainly musically into those 4, not including the vocals, is so that I can master them differently, because they've all got such different dynamic ranges. You kind of need to treat them separately to make them become a whole. And I think that's worth people looking at, because especially with drums, I suppose one of the big differences between live and studio is in the studio you're so driven by luffs and
Sure.
where you want to sit dynamically. In that way, live you don't have that constraint. So what it means is you can just I always up compress rather than down compress.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of tools that rather than compressing the peaks, doesn't touch the peaks, but what it does is compresses and auto gains underneath the threshold. So you're bringing up all the low level detail, which is brilliant on drums if you're not having to do it for a studio mix, because you can just leave all your peaks and get that impact and just bring up the low level detail, which essentially adds sustain to your toms, etc. so that way you can keep it big and exciting, but without it sounding loud, because you're not squashing all the peaks and just shoving it down people's throats. You're
Sure.
letting it breathe.
Sure. Because people's source, or what's in their imagination, isn't like a heavily compressed studio album. It's like the experience of cinema, where
Yeah, exactly.
you're being kind of whacked, and
Yeah,
it's a really sort of roller coaster ride in cinema.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's interesting that the kind of, the standards are very different for cinema and studio. And again, for live, you have that freedom to make it big and expansive. So why not? And I think the other thing I would say is I always think of a mix as being site specific. And what I mean by that is when you're in a room, if you walk into a room, you kind of get a feeling of what a show's going to sound like in there. And you'll do a different mix if you're in a 500 seater or a 20,000 seater.
Sure.
And I think that's quite important to kind of not try and make your show sound like your show, but make your show sound right for the venue. Because if you've got a venue with some tricky acoustics, you're not going to beat the room.
Sure.
So you've got to try and use the room to help you get a product that works well for the audience.
Gotcha. So how does like the L Acoustics PA, like obviously you've selected the PA, and I guess you've been on record about saying, similar to what you've just said about, you don't dread large spaces.
Yeah.
You like to push audio in, push sound into large spaces, and I guess using the space as another kind of instrument.
Yeah.
Almost. Like, is there anything to say about this PA and be able to do that on a consistent day in, day out basis?
I think the lovely thing about L Acoustics is the consistency across the range, which means that it's very scalable. And the short throw boxes sound very similar to the long throw boxes at the listening position. So that kind of gives you the freedom to be quite specific in the design about what you want where, and not feel worried about trying to match things together, because you just know it'll sit together nicely. Yep. And the way the P1M1 software makes setup incredibly easy. One of my big things, which I guess is something I learnt back in the theatre world, which is when you're touring, it's more important to have time to make things sound nice than it is to have time to set up a very complicated system. And what I mean by that is, in a theatre show, you might want to have 3 rows of delays, but if you're still rigging them when they're opening the doors and you haven't had time to set them up, then it's pointless.
Sure.
And what's great about the L Acoustic system is it's very fast to set up, and you can do a lot of the work on the computer beforehand. And so essentially you, as Tom was saying, you do your sweeps, and I very rarely EQ anything above 200 hertz now. Mm-hmm. The systems are so good at getting a consistent kind of mid and top end that you just have to kind of sort out inevitably those lower frequencies which don't behave as predicted. But it just frees you up to have more time to tune that way and listen to what the room's doing. Because I think that's the important bit when touring. If you've got the right PA set up well in a room, you shouldn't actually need to touch your mix, because it should transfer well. And I think on a show this side, that's quite an important thing. If you're having to start again with your mix every day, you'll just run out of time when you've got 200 odd channels.
But you're surprised. Obviously, you don't run virtual sound check when you get here. You sort of basically expect when the band strikes up for sound check that it's going to sound.
Well, no,
largely the same,
I
or-
do virtual sound check. So what I tend to do is Tom will timeline and tune the system, and then we'll listen to some music, and yeah, we've got some reference tracks that we always use. I love using Pictures at an Exhibition by Mussorgsky. There's a great recording by the Cleveland Symphony, which is just a stereo pair of mics back in 1979. But it's really open and phase coherent and all that stuff. So you can check that your system's working well, and then I'll virtual sound check, which is it's a brilliant tool because you can deal with checking all the kind of different sections and any of the usual oddities that you get before the band turn up. So when the band turn up, actually the sound check is more about what they're hearing in their ears than what's happening out front of house, because hopefully that's all done by then.
Sure. And I guess sort of finally, for people who are, I guess, a little bamboozled by the big figures, like the number of inputs, the number of instruments, the number of people singing and playing, like how the heck do you just get all that detail in a way that, everybody gets a little moment in the sunshine, I suppose.
Well, I think you've just hit the nail on the head. It's saying, giving everyone their little moment in the sunshine. I always think, when I'm mixing a piece, it's not about getting a mix for the piece. It's about, I have a different mix every 8 bars, essentially, because what I tend to do is try and steer the audience's focus. So, you'll listen to 8 bars of the string section, and then you'll listen to the brass or listen to woodwind or whatever. And at the end of the piece, you go, wow, that was a great mix. I could hear everything.
Sure.
Well, the reality is you probably couldn't all of the time.
Gotcha.
But you're just steering the focus. And I work quite closely with lighting. And that we have a lot of back and forth, because to pull focus, lighting is a really good tool. And so I'll be telling them what's important in the mix at that point.
Yeah.
And vice versa. They'll go, oh, this person's doing something interesting. Let's focus on them for those 4 bars or whatever. So there's a bit of that. And obviously, if you're doing a one-off gig, you can't really do that. But when you've got a mix that is as dense as this one, it's a really good trick to just let people have their moment in the sunshine, as you said.
Psychoacoustic stuff.
Yeah, completely.
And are we talking about half a dB here, half a dB there? Like what's it like to mix?
It's
balance, I guess.
It's probably 2 dB.
Sure.
Half a dB. I'd love to say I'm that accurate. But it's funny, actually, because Hans, in a way, makes it easy, because the way he writes, he kind of does a lot of featuring sections and or counter melodies that you can play with, but also the kind of soloistic parts, it all kind of drifts in and out, as opposed to just bang, here's a solo, bang, there's something else. And that makes it quite easy just to be able to
follow the arc, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot going on, but it feels sort of natural. And that might just be because we've sort of just, the mix has grown with the project and what the band are doing.
And I guess to full circle with our conversation, and you talking about how to bring all of the disparate pieces together into one bigger work, as it were, tonally, or how would you describe that from your perspective? Like, what are you doing to bring that continuity or glue it together for listeners?
Ooh, I don't know. I suppose The dynamic of the show, I mean, there are some obvious, Batman's going to be loud. Last Samurai is going to be quiet with some surprises in it,
Sure.
and I think you just in your head, you block out where things are. And also that's partly the conversations with Hans about the set list of what follows what, to try and make that dynamic journey. I remember on the first tour we did, part one was all quite gentle, part two was all quite full on. And I think this time we've got a much better dynamic journey through of big intense pieces and then a little break. And I think you just kind of instinctively feel it. I know that's a real cop-out answer. And maybe that's where experience comes in, I think. And probably, theatre background, it's all about the dynamic journey as a whole. And I think I think the place to start is basically loud is only loud if it follows quiet. And that's the thing to remember. If you want something to be loud, make sure whatever's before it's quiet. And just try and pull things back, because if you do that, it just gives you the freedom to go further. And it just makes it a more fun show.
That's a really good answer. I love that end bit of contrast, and having something that is whisper quiet can be just as kind of impactful.
Yeah, completely.
As something that's 120 dB.
Yeah.
You got a lot of subs, like you could go crazy.
So we do have a lot of subs. We've got 48 KS28s, 24 flown, 12 aside, which is the main PA, and then on the floor, it's interesting you mentioned them, because we've actually double stacked 24 subs, so 12 wide by 2 high, with 2 separate feeds. One is a gentle feed for essentially just extending the front fills, as you'd expect, and then the other feed is for sound effects, because there's a few synths that go very low, and they're mainly there for a moment in Batman, where there is a very big, I'm not going to say loud, a very big sound effect moment, which actually peaks, I think, at 137 dB flat.
Wow.
But again, it's one of those that you don't actually hear, you just feel.
Yeah. So it's like, again, going back to the cinema, it's like LFE versus bass management.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, wow. Thanks, Colin. You rock. Appreciate it.
Oh, that's
it's great
all right.
to get up here and
thank
see
you.
things close up. Much obliged.
Thank you.